Hello, dear children. I welcome you all to the radio learning program that is produced by REP with support from UNICEF. I am your teacher, Mary. I'm going to teach you social studies for P6 learners. So our dear parents, I really appreciate you so much for supporting our children as they are learning from home. So, children, are you ready for today's lesson? Do you have your notebooks ready? Do you have your pens ready? Can you come close to the radio? Okay, I hope you're ready now. So, we are going to do a recap of the last lesson. So, children, do you recall what we learned in the last lesson? Do you recall what we learned in the last lesson? Okay? We learned about transport. We learned about transport and the forms of transport like air, water, road, and lorry. And we looked at the advantages and the disadvantages of all the forms of transport. Let us have a short break and we continue.
Come along and play with us.
Welcome back, children. So today, we are going to learn about communication. We are going to learn about communication in East Africa. And you can find this topic on page 220 and 221 of the P6 SST textbook. You can find this topic on page 220 and 221 of the P6 SST textbook. So these are the objectives of today's lesson. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to define communication. You will also be able to identify different forms and types of communication. You will also be able to state the difficulties and the dangers related to communication. Those are objectives for today's lesson. So children, can you stand up for a warm-up? Can we first have an energizer before we learn our lesson? Okay, I'm going to sing this song. You will sing with me the second time. Okay, let us go. Sweetly sings the donkey at the break of day. If you do not feed it, this is what it says. Ooh oh, ooh oh, ooh oh, ooh oh, ooh oh. Can we sing it together? Okay, let us sing. Sweetly sings the donkey at the break of day. If you do not feed it, this is what it says. Ooh oh, ooh oh, ooh oh, ooh oh, ooh oh. Sweetly sings the donkey at the break of day. If you do not feed it, this is what it says. Ooh oh, ooh oh, ooh oh, ooh oh, ooh oh. Well done, children. Can you sit down? So, as I said earlier, we are going to learn about communication. So, what do you understand by communication? So, communication refers to the transfer of information from one person to another. Communication is the transfer of information from one person to another. So, we have different forms of communication. There are different forms of communication or means of communication. So the major forms of communication in East Africa are postal communication. This includes sending letters and parcels. Postal communication includes sending letters and parcels. That is how they can also communicate. Another form of communication is through electronic media. Electronic media can include radio, TV, yeah? You can use telephones, and telephones we have mobile phones or landlines, and also internet. Those are the electronic media. That is how people communicate. They can communicate through radios, through TVs, they can communicate through telephones. People call themselves on telephones. They call each other on telephones. And also internet. People send emails on internet. On internet, they can use emails, they can use Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So, another form of communication is the print media. Print media. So, print media, these include newspapers, magazines, and journals. In print media, they include newspapers, magazines, and journals. So the print medias are just papers which are printed. You have seen newspapers, I think. We have New Times here in Rwanda. Have different magazines and journals. So those are different forms of communication we can use in East Africa. Now, what is the importance of communication? What is the importance of communication? Okay? So communication, point number 1, it helps to promote interaction among people. Through communication, people are able to interact. A person who is living in Kigali can interact with someone who is living in Rusizi. Through telephones, they can call each other on phones and they communicate. They interact. Also through communication, people are provided with employment. People who work on radios, they have employment. People who work on TVs, people who set up the landlines, people who also sell phones, telephones, they are employed in that way. So through communication, people are provided with employment. So communication networks also promote trade. People are able to sell and buy goods through communication networks. Through electronic media, like using emails, people are able to send their products through emails. They share the information they have and people can sell their products through that. And also Facebook, people can put up any product and people, when they check on Facebook, they are able to buy their products. So trade can be promoted through communication network. So let us listen to this case study. I'm going to read a story of a lady who lives in Kigali. And you'll be able to identify the difficulties that we find in communication, the difficulties we find in using mobile phones or communication. So listen carefully to this story. This is how the story is. Jane lives in Kigali. Jane lives in Kigali. On finishing college, her mother bought her a mobile phone. And Jane was very happy. Little did she know that she could face difficulties using her new phone. One day, she visited her grandmother in the remote area. She could not use her phone because there was no network. She could not use her phone because there was no network. When she found a network, the phone's battery was low. When she found the network, the phone's battery was low. She could not charge it because there was no electricity. She later came back to Kigali and she kept using her phone. However, by bad luck, while using the internet, her phone was affected by a virus. It crashed and needed to be repaired. Can I read the whole story again? Jane lives in Kigali. On finishing college, her mother bought her a mobile phone. Jane was very happy. Little did she know that she would face difficulties using her new phone. One day, she visited her grandmother in a remote area. She could not use her phone because there was no network. When she found network, the phone's battery was low. She could not charge it because there was no electricity. She later got back to Kigali and continued using her phone. However, by bad luck, while using internet and her phone was affected by a virus. It crashed and needed to be repaired. So, you have listened to the whole story, children. Can you now identify the difficulties that Jane faced while using her mobile phone? What are those difficulties that Jane faced while using her mobile phone? So remember, the first difficulty was she could not find network in the village. That is a very big challenge. And next, when she found the network, her battery was low. She could not use her phone without a battery. And more so, there was no electricity in the village. So Jane faced so many difficulties. Even when she had the phone, she was not able to use it because of network problems, because of the battery problems, and also electricity. So now this brings me to the question. What are some of the difficulties or dangers related to communication? What are some of the problems or dangers related to communication? So, some of the major problems associated with communication, they include lack of electricity. Lack of electricity in rural areas for using electronic media. Electronic media, we had said there are radio, TV, telephones. And if there's no electricity in the village, people with all the TVs and the radios, they will not be able to use them because there's no electricity to charge the batteries and also to use for TV and radio. So lack of electricity in rural areas will make it very hard to use electronic media. Number 2, low levels of technical skill. Low levels of technical skill and education for using print and electronic media. There are so many people in villages who do not have the skills of using a phone. They don't know how to use a phone. They also don't know how to use a TV. So if they are not able to use it, it is going to be very hard for someone to communicate to them. They will not be able to get information that is passed on the TV, on the radio. So low levels of technical skill will also hinder communication. So point number 3, poor network services. Poor network services. They make it difficult to communicate using phones because it is very hard to communicate without network. You need network so as to communicate with someone on phone. So if there are poor network services, it will be difficult to communicate with people on phones. Point number 4, increased crime rate is also one of the difficulty in communication. There are so many crimes taking place through the use of mobile phones. People deceive on phones, people can forge things on phones. So there's a lot of increased crime rate because of using the means of electronic media. When they use the telephones to communicate, they can deceive, they can steal others. So there's a lot of increased crime rate through the means of communication. So point number 5, the internet may be misused to spread spam and pornography. You know, internet is very good. It passes on information. But also, people misuse the internet. They can spread spam and also pornography. People can watch bad things on internet, and which is not very good. So the last point, a danger or a problem of communication, high poverty levels. High poverty levels stop some people from accessing some means of communication. High poverty levels stop some people from accessing some means of communication, like radio, televisions, phones. All those items are needed to carry out communication. So if people are poor, they will not be able to access all these means of communication, and therefore communication will not be effective.
Come along and play with us.
So we have looked at the dangers or difficulties we find in communication. Now, can we look at the measures of overcoming the problems associated with communication? Let us look at the measures of overcoming the problems associated with communication. What can we do to overcome the challenges we mentioned? What can we do? As a government, even as an individual, there is something you can do so as to avoid or overcome the challenges we face. So we can overcome the problems associated with communication by 1. Carrying out regular maintenance of communication lines, like poles. The government can carry out regular maintenance of communication lines. They can put up lines. If a place has a pole and it has lost network, the government can try to maintain it. Or the people who are in charge of setting up the poles. So they need to maintain the poles. They can also check out the poles that are not working well, and they fix the wires so as to make sure the communication lines are effective. Point number 2, using other sources of electricity in rural areas. They can use other sources of electricity in rural areas like solar. Solar is freely provided. It is from the sun. So instead of waiting on electricity, which may not be there in the rural area, they can use solar so as to charge their phones. They can also use solar for their televisions and the radios. And point number 3, how to overcome challenges of communication. Improve literacy levels through adult education. Improve literacy levels through adult education. There are so many old people in villages who don't know how to read and write, who don't know how to speak some languages, who don't even listen. So let the government help them to improve their literacy levels. And also the people who are in villages who are not educated, they can also be able to improve their literacy levels. Let them be able to know how to listen to a particular language, be able to speak, and also be able to write. Be able to read, to write, to speak, and to listen. So point number 4, there can also be construction of communication equipments to improve network coverage. There are places in villages which don't have network. So how can they help those places in villages without network? They can put up communication equipment so as to improve the network coverage. Lastly, register all mobile phones. Register all mobile phones to reduce crimes which always happen through the use of mobile phones. Okay, we have looked at the challenges that are faced with communication, and also we've looked at the measures of overcoming the problems that are associated with communication. So let us have this short break and we continue.
Come along and play with us.
Welcome back, children. So in conclusion, let me summarize everything we have learned in the lesson. We have learned about communication, and we said it is the transfer of information from one place to another. And we looked at the different forms of communication, like electronic media. We looked at the print media, which includes newspapers, magazines. We also looked at postal communication. And we have also looked at the importance of communication. It is very important for people to communicate because they get to interact and they get to know information that is happening in different areas. We've looked at problems associated with communication and the measures of overcoming the problems associated with communication. So now, for your homework, you are going to research about the effects of foreigners in East Africa. Research about the effects of foreigners in East Africa, the coming of foreigners in Africa. What were their effects? And that is going to be the topic of our next lesson. So children, thank you for paying attention, and our dear parents, thank you for assisting our children. So I hope you'll join me in the next lesson. Bye-bye.